Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest. Today's episode we've called The Real Life Wendy Rhoades, and I'm really excited to have everyone get to meet who haven't yet. Julie Moore, who's a director of YSC Consulting, and that is part of the leadership and culture group at Accenture. YSC had been acquired by Accenture not that long ago, and you'll hear a little bit more about that during our talk. Julie is focused on leadership and talent, and having worked both in-house and as an external consultant for over a decade, she started her career at Warner Brothers, first in the HR generalist role before moving into a specialist role in HR, focused on learning, organizational development, and talent management. She then joined Deloitte as a human capital consultant, working with Fortune 500 organizations on some of their toughest and most complex strategic, cultural, and leadership challenges. YSC Consulting is the world's premier independent provider of leadership strategy and services, and I can actually vouch for that based on my work and Edison's work with YSC. As a member of the dedicated private equity practice, Julie uses her skills to work with investors across verticals. Using a combination of rigor and relationship capital, Julie teams with partners and clients to ensure they have the right leadership in place through every stage of the investment period, from diligence to exit, and within the PE firm itself. And again, I would just, that before Julie comes on, say that Edison and our portfolio companies have found she and YSC to be phenomenal at what they do. So without further ado, I'm really excited to have Julie on today's show. So Julie, I introduced you like this in the past, and I did in this introduction to call you the real life Wendy Rhoades. And for our listeners who don't know who that is or don't watch Billions, she's the guru, savant, coach of the team at the hedge fund. But that may or may not be a good thing. I'm not sure if you like that because she's got some of her own idiosyncrasies, which I know you don't have. That said, I'd love at a high level for you to describe what you do, because I think sometimes coaches and team development get thrown out. Stay kind of at the high level. I want to drill down and follow-up questions on really what you do.
Well, so first of all, for anyone listening who that reference was lost on, book your next 2 weekends to catch up on Billions because it's worth the watch. I love that. You know, people didn't understand what I did for so long. And so to have it in the media and give people a way to relate to what I do, I appreciate, and I hope that I'm as effective as Wendy without so many of the idiosyncrasies. So that is one of the ways I sometimes describe my job. Another one that I'll sometimes use is in the same way that you have a family therapist that works with the family. I'm a family therapist. The family just happens to be an executive team. So those are the metaphors I use. But in terms of what I actually do, I advise individuals, teams, and organizations on leadership. So you are up against a big challenge. You have a big goal you want to get. How do you make sure that the people you have leading your company work together and lead themselves in a way that are going to enable you to get there? And that's usually what I say, but family therapist and Wendy Rhoades seem to be what resonate most with people.
People quickly go, oh yeah, I get it. In disclosure to our audience, having both seen and experienced your work as a board member and a couple of portfolio companies, you're as good or better in my opinion. And I'm not just sucking up because you decided to join the show. But how does one get in this business? How do you even stumble upon it? Did you know you wanted to be a coach when you were in college?
I think there's the generic answer to that, and then there's my path. So I'll start with my path since that's the one I'm most familiar with. I actually studied organizational behavior in college. And I remember going to my professor and saying, this is what I want to do. I want to work with organizations and leaders in that psychology frame of reference to say, how do you get your people in your org to work as effectively as possible? And I will never forget, he looked at me and said, yeah, you can't really do that straight out of college. You got to go be in business a few decades, then you can do it. And so I sort of put that dream to bed. And then I ended up falling into human resources. And that was my path. So I was in HR for a number of years. Then I moved into talent management and org effectiveness. And only then when I went into consulting did I realize, hold on, this little thing I loved in college, it actually is a job. And that's when I started to focus on team effectiveness and also executive coaching. So that was my path. People don't always come through HR. A lot of people do become business leaders and then later in their career become coaches. So I think there's a lot of different paths and a lot of different types of coaches.
Well, knowing that you wanted to do this probably helped, but the HR people who tend to be administrators and make sure the benefits are in place and maybe you're a little bit of help on performance reviews versus I'll call it real value add to the CEO and an HR role. And you got that pretty quick because frankly, for those who don't see you, you're relatively young. So you didn't have to spend several decades building your resume. So you figured it out pretty fast.
Well, first of all, Chris, I just got my hair colored the other day, so you can't see all the grays. In case there are any HR people listening, I will say HR, even in the traditional sense, is a value add.
100%.
But you are right. So when I was in HR, the way I framed it was it felt like we were very reactive. There was a problem, we went to employee relations. The executive decided to make a change, we altered the org chart. And I hated that. I felt like I was at the tail end of the process and I wanted to actually be at the front end. And so for me, it was the difference between being a reactive function and proactive. And that's how I started to move into org effectiveness. And then that's eventually how I got into leadership coaching. In terms of being earlier in my career, sometimes I actually think my college professor was right. There's a piece of, I think, what we do that's pattern recognition. And I remember someone telling me, you just need time on earth. And so I think I am fortunate in that I care deeply about people and I'm fascinated by business. And so it means my innate curiosity makes me love this work. And I also think there's an advantage. I personally probably wouldn't go to an executive coach who's very early in their career just because there's a pattern recognition that won't be there.
That was helpful. It's interesting. All type A's hate, it's just going to take time. So if I only knew then what I know now, that answer really made more sense than I realized. But it's interesting because in our business, apprenticeship is the old school term for that. But my young associates don't want to hear, you actually have to see it a few times. So what is your view on why leadership and culture is having a moment? Clearly, COVID helped with that, all kinds of things. And to me, it goes up and down. It's really front and center now. So not only being acquired, but what are your thoughts on, is it a moment? In your career, it's been probably a constant, but it feels like it's had more attention now than ever.
Well, I come to this with a biased perspective, but the first thing I would have said is I hope it's not a moment so much as an awakening or a realization, because we've realized that leadership isn't a nice to have. It's a lever of value creation. I was just talking to someone yesterday who was telling me that he has been on a team of all-stars who achieved half of what they should and a team of mediocre people who had incredible high performance. And that for him was the light bulb moment of, wow, there is something in what a group of people can accomplish together. And so that's why my hope is that it's not a moment so much as a realization that human potential, group dynamics, team psychology, there's real value you can extract by looking at that. And so on my most cynical day, I don't know that the moment is so much about humanity, so much it is we keep trying to look for ways to extract more value from organizations. And this is one more.
Well said. A moment's not fair. An awakening is a really good way to put it. So, but I'm seeing more and more PE firms start to lean into this. So I think you're right about an awakening. But I guess what I'm curious is that recent in your own career? Are PE firms starting to realize the playbooks aren't enough? The awakening part is actually it's got a Pied Piper, if you will, in the PE world. I guess I'm curious. Is that true?
Awakening feels like my more optimistic self. Again, the cynic in me, it says, I really just think it's smart capitalism. There's more and more competition. PE market is so much more saturated than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think you're having to look for more and more ways to distinguish yourself and how you're going to support a company. You have to look for more and more ways of how you're going to accelerate the growth of that company and create higher returns for your shareholders. So the system itself is asking people to look under, it's almost like every part of the couch. And so I think one of the coins under the couch that hadn't been flipped as much was leadership. So I think you're absolutely right that it is a newer, I wouldn't want to call it a trend, but it's a newer focus area. And we're seeing even more of the more mature organizations who are later to adopt an importance on leadership and people, realizing they're going to be caught too late.
I meant to ask this when we were talking about your background. So sorry if I'm backtracking a bit. You're good at what you do, full stop. How did you know you were good at it?
So I recently got feedback that is probably the best way I know how to answer the question. And what they told me is that I have a deep well of compassion, but a great amount of courage. And so what that means is that I can sit with someone and have a huge amount of empathy for who they are, what they're going through, understanding why they would make the decisions they would make. And at the same time, I'm going to call them on it and tell them why, or help them explore why that may not be as effective as it could be, or getting them the results that they actually want. And so it feels somewhat egotistical to say, I do think everyone has gifts. And I think part of my gift is the ability to sit with someone and really want to understand them and help them get what they want and help them see where they might be getting in their own way.
So there's a little bit of cheating because I've experienced this with you and you've told me this, you walk into a team dynamic, 5, 7 people, maybe more, maybe less, but there's always one, maybe even two that are like, NFW, this is never going to work. This is BS. Why are they making me do it? Their arms are folded. How do you approach that? But also, are there just people who you can't break through with?
Yeah. Well, first of all, those are my favorite people. So if this were a podcast for leadership practitioners, my answer for them would be I never go into a team environment cold or blind. So I will have met with everyone one-on-one, both to understand who they are, their perspective, and also plant seeds of when we're all together, what do you want to say? How do you want to show up? So part of the way I guard against that is I would never go in there with the person having their arms crossed and me not knowing that they were already going to show up that way. So now the second part of the question, or if it's not for practitioners, but just out of curiosity, okay, what do you do when someone's resistant? My main goal is to meet them where they are. I am not going to force someone to open up. I'm not going to force them to engage in the conversation. They probably have a really good reason to be resistant. There's a solid reason why it's not a psychologically safe environment. They have their own experiences where in opening up or naming an elephant in the room, they got burned. And so it's really understanding, okay, why are they showing up that way? And I don't want to force them into a position that actually doubles down on that. And they go, see, I told you it didn't work. It made things even worse. So are there people I've never quite cracked open? I'm sure there are, but I might just not be the right one. It might not be the right moment. So my belief in people and humanity is that everyone actually wants to make a positive impact. So I just might not be the right person with the right perspective or the right words to help them out of it. And that's okay. I wouldn't force myself into that. So I'm sure there's people I haven't cracked open. And I really love those people because it's even more fun to find what's the part of you that actually wants to be seen or heard in this environment.
So, we have this operating partner that you've both worked with and kind of spoken to, Steve Schloss. And he's the first time I'd heard psychological safety was a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 from him. You just used it just now. Trust, psychological safety, they're almost interchangeable. But just talk about that trust building. Okay, you're being hired by either my CEO or my board or the PE firm said, we need this. There may be more than one person. There's one who's really overt about crossing their arms, but everybody's wondering, this is traveling right back and I'm being evaluated. How do you go about that to get them to open up?
Number one, that is a completely sane and even smart hesitation to have. And so I just acknowledge, yeah, you should be questioning that. And there are dynamics, there are coaches, there are situations where that is exactly what's happening. And so they're actually reading the situation right. And so above all, I would tell an executive, trust your instinct. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So now for me, what I go in with, and I think the way I create trust is I'm truly authentic, that I am there for the health of the person, the health of the organization, and the health of the value creation plan. And so it would not behoove those three things for me to be crossing wires or inappropriately sharing information. That's my own integrity that's at risk. And so I ask them to trust in that, but also test me on it. I also will often go by the rule of threes, which is if you tell me something that I actually think I should share with the PE firm or with your CEO or with your CFO, I'm going to tell you that I'd like to share it. That's number one. Number two, I'll share it. And then number three, I'll tell you that I've shared it. And so that rule of three creates transparency. And I say what I'm going to say. I tell you if I'm going to share something. And it creates an honest relationship in a very complicated stakeholder map.
That's well put. I think there's a lot of firms who put on, there's a little bit of a theater, and you have been a very transparent, radically so, as I like to say, radical transparency is the only way. And that approach has really worked super well in working with you. So kudos on figuring that out whenever you did, but it works. Let's talk a little bit about art and science and art of this business, because I think most people think it's just like lay on the couch. It's all family therapist. But what I was surprised when I first interfaced with you all and the Edison team, my team did, was the number of evaluations, the amount of data. And to your point, even one skeptic on my team who was like, wow, that was really interesting to learn that about myself. So talk about the tools you use and the art and science balance here when you go about what you're doing.
Yeah, it is definitely a mix of art and science. So one of my favorite quotes that I think about often is you have to speak into someone's listening. And so if I came to a PE audience with no data, with no analytics, I am not getting into the listening of the audience I have. And so I think there's almost a requirement to bring the science to get some credibility and an opening to a conversation so that you have more avenues into it. So pieces of science that I really see, I would look to three. I think number one, there's individual science, individual data. There's a number of different tools out there that just give you some frameworks to look at your own personality. So there's the Hogan, there's Strengths Finder. There's a number of different ones. I think what I would encourage anyone exploring that to look at is the validity of the test and the reliability of it. But there's some real reputable ones that give you data where even if you disagree with the results, that's data to look at. And so you really get a sense of, gosh, what is important to me? How might I be perceived by others? So that's one source of data. Another is team data. I think we've got a little bit off the deep end with culture and engagement surveys, and we're no longer quite measuring what we intend. But that gives you valuable data as well around what are the topics or areas that, even if it's not about hitting a certain number, that is lower than the rest of the areas we've measured. That's something we should look at and talk about. So I think that's another area where data and science is really important. And then the third, one of the things that we have debated about most in any work in the leadership, talent, culture field is how do you measure ROI? Because leadership is a hard thing to measure ROI on. And so that's the last place of science where we will look at business performance. We will look at retention rates. We will look at measures of team effectiveness to show a before and after. So in the field, we call them interventions. I'm always hesitant because that sounds so clinical, but it does give you a before and after to know, did this intervention make a difference? And so the individual level data, team level data, and then ROI data are the places where I think science is indispensable. I understand why people would call it softer field.
Yeah. Would you go so far as to say to someone listening out there that has heard from someone, oh, get a coach or get someone, an outsider, if they don't use data, don't use them? Is it that important, so to speak, in some form, not necessarily prescriptive on what one?
Yes. I don't know that I would say it as harshly, but if you are meeting with someone who's not looking at any form of data, if you're not starting from that, you're working off your own perception, and your own perception is flawed. And then your coach is pulled into that perception with you, whether it's a tool that looks at individual data, team data, 360 data. I can't imagine starting a coaching engagement without one of those. Otherwise, I've got a flawed narrator because it's them telling me how effective or ineffective they are.
The bottom line is this idea of bias. We all come to the table with it. So to your point, I don't care how good you are, if it's all gut, there's something's going to be off. I agree. What do you think about peer mentorship and peer coaching? Most people know YPO and things like that. Helpful, not helpful? Does it just become a echo chamber?
I think it's wildly helpful. One of the observations that I have found more and more true over time is that leadership is incredibly lonely. To create connections with other people, I don't see it as an echo chamber at all. It's a way to just empathize, sympathize, create connection with people who are facing similar challenges and also get ideas. And so I often encourage executives to find networks or communities that give them their outlet. A coach is a helpful space, but I'm not in your role. I can never be quite as in it as someone else can. And that's part of my value, is that I bring a different set of experiences and perspectives, but it's by no means the only one. So absolutely, I think those peer networks are hugely valuable.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But I was curious in your experience, you see the same. That's interesting. So you've got, for a moment, there's advisors or board members, not even investors, but they count too, that are on this podcast saying, oh, you know what? I keep hearing this. I better go look into it. But they know the CEO or founder is skeptical. A lot of times buyout firms, you control the business, you can kind of force it. We sometimes use the pull versus push. I gotta have the company pull me in versus I push my agenda or my playbook in. Hopefully build a better relationship than that at Edison because we're so good at what we do. I'm joking, of course, being sarcastic, but the bottom line is advisors, board members, you see a CEO needs something, a team that needs something. What's the way you would tell us, if you will, us being, I'm a board member, the way to approach that CEO goes, I don't need it.
Yeah, well, it would depend on the CEO. The first thing I would say is let's really understand who this person is. For some, it needs to be their idea. And so in that, do you say something like, hey, you know what? All high performing athletes have coaches. If you are up against a major challenge or demanding significant growth from the organization, is that a support or an outlet you would want? So that could be an approach. For someone who maybe it's more just they don't know what they don't know, a lot of times I will meet with people and say, let's just meet. We're not signing anything. This won't cost anything. If you find value, then we can talk about that. And so do you create some type of initial introduction that is just no commitment or at least low commitment? What I would go back to is what is the resistance that the CEO or executive has? What's the approach that tends to work in influencing them? And then use that. I go back to what we said before, speak into their listening. What convinces them? And then go that route.
And before we came on, yes, we need to be pithy. And you just gave us that. That soundbite is awesome. Speak into their listening is definitely something that I'm going to try and use a little more. I try that anyway, but I didn't really put it that way in my own mind. So it's funny because I think sometimes coaches, the same thing happens with investors. Everyone thinks your life is perfect. Like you have a life too. So you're having a tough day. Your kids did something crazy in the morning or they're sick at school, but you've got to be on your game when you're engaging, right? So how do you deal with that? What is your go-to to compartmentalize? If you don't compartmentalize, you just cancel a call because you're having a bad day. What do you do to be as good today and tomorrow, I guess, when you're having that bad day or something comes up?
Yeah. So Chris, you're catching me in one of those windows. This is a hard few months for me and I'm not my best. And so my favorite part of coaching is that I have to walk the talk. And so the same things that I would tell others to do are what I do. So what do I go to? Number one, I have my own coach. And so I talk to them and really figure out what I need to do. Number two, I had gotten off track on meditating. I meditate and I've been doing it consistently now for about a month because I knew I needed that space to recenter myself. And then I'm getting outside every day again because I realized I was chained to my computer. And so those are the things that worked for me. But I find you are right. My job is incredibly energetically demanding, because when I am with someone, I need to be fully present and holding space for them. And so that means that I have to figure out the ways that I can show up to that and be truly present. And again, talking to practitioners, we call it being a clean vessel. And so it takes a lot of work to do that.
I assume you have to be an extrovert to get good at your business because you have to like people. But is that true?
No, I think there's a lot of introverts who end up in coaching because it's the one-on-one intimate, deep connection that actually fills them. For me, I am more extroverted. And so my cup gets filled the more I get to engage with people and have them truly open up. And one of my personal mottos is to leave everything, every person, every place, and everything better than I found it. And so to have a conversation and know that either I've uplifted them or helped them see something in a different way, I leave that more energized. And so that's my extroversion. But no, introverts can be just as quality of coaches and just as drawn to the field because of the one-on-one intimate nature. Now, I do think the teamwork I do, it's probably easier for people who are comfortable and enjoy group settings because it's a lot of interpersonal data to take in and manage.
And it's almost unfair because you do both. And I personally see you do both well. So I sound like a real fanboy here. I know that for the audience, but what do you like better? Or what are you better at? The individual or the team? And I know you're going to say both, but if you had to pick one.
I mean, you're asking me to choose a favorite child. I would say it's the teamwork. The reason being that in one-on-one coaching, you can make an impact, but they then return to the system. If you go back to where I started this with the family example, you can work one-on-one with a member of the family, but when they go back to that family, when they go to that Thanksgiving dinner, the dynamics return. It is hard to only have one factor change. And so what I love about team coaching, team effectiveness, team workshops is I'm working with the very system. And so I can see how the individual parts play, but we can make, I think, greater change and greater impact because you've got all the parts in front of you and see how they interrelate.
It's funny because when I've done both with you, with other coaches, I actually get more out of the team, even though I really enjoy being coached and having a coach myself, having it all. And I sometimes argue that you can't. From what I've seen from you, you figured it out. So mom, professional, how have you figured out when to give? Can you have it all? There's always sacrifices.
There's always sacrifices. I don't know that you can have it all. I think you can have it all, but things are at different volumes at different moments. I find so much value in talking to others. I think our world is also, it's a tough world. It's an always on world. And so there's more being asked of us than in previous generations. And so having it all itself has a different connotation. And so to just get to connect with others on, wow, we are up against a big challenge. I find that helpful and comforting in knowing I'm not facing all this alone. But I will say the vision you have of me that I have it all together or that I've got it all, oh goodness, that couldn't be further from the truth.
I think that's true for all of us, unless we actually see someone lose it in a moment. Because at some moment they did lose it sometime during the last day, week, or month for sure. So bringing this almost full circle, did you ever have a moment or moments when this actually didn't feel like the right thing for you? Because honestly, if there's a person who I've known for now a few years who's found the absolutely right career, the right fit for them, you're it. And I think about that for CEOs, for executives, their doubts creep in. Did you ever have that moment or a moment like that?
I would not say that I have the doubt of if I'm in the right career. I feel really fortunate. I love this work. What I do occasionally have is imposter syndrome. I am lucky enough to have audience and get to interact with people who are incredibly successful, incredibly brilliant. Chris, you've been so kind to me over the course of this podcast. I could never do what you are doing. I could never have built the business you've been. You are so impressive. And so that's where I go, gosh, am I good enough to be doing what I do? Do I make enough impact? Those thoughts creep in. But that's where I go back to what I tell executives around, okay, number one, that tells you care. If you're worried about whether you're good enough or not, that means you really care about what you're doing. And then number two, are those thoughts serving me? Are they actually making me better? What am I using those thoughts for? Because if they're just making me doubt myself, those aren't super helpful. And so I don't doubt the career. I do have moments where I doubt myself or I doubt where I'm doing the career. So you mentioned the acquisition. So right now I'm in the question of, is this the right home for me to bring my craft to? And I think that's a question most professionals have is the environment the right place for me to bring my best?
Back to transparency. It's so cool for you to share that because everyone goes through that, no matter where they are. Am I in the right place at the right time and all that sort of thing? As you were talking, you made me think about a question that wasn't here, even on my talking points. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of CEOs and their management teams. And I usually ask this of other CEOs, like first time CEOs, what advice would you have? And frankly, you can give CEOs advice. So as you see, less about coaching, what would be your go-to advice for the CEO that's kind of, we'll say, in that scaling mode? Could be one thing, could be two things. What would you say to them in their building mode?
There's two different things I would say. Number one, create your personal board of directors. There is no way that you can know everything that needs to happen, nor should you. And create that personal board of directors that you can go to. So I like to think of myself as being on a number of executives' personal board of directors, but I shouldn't be their only person. They should have other people. So create that group of people that have a number of different specialties and expertise that you can go to. That would be number one. And then the number two thing, and this would really be about the scaling, but especially founder CEOs. What I see them up against is they hold on tightly to what got them to this moment. And a lot of times it means loosening the reins on those. It's like that quote, what got you here won't get you there. And so be willing to question the success formula that got you here. And it's a very hard ask of someone. But I think as you scale and grow, it becomes a necessity that you use a different thinking to solve problems that you didn't have before.
There are probably a couple of CEOs in the Edison portfolio or those I work with that will assume I put you up to that answer. But it is so true. It is so true. And I hate to say it's become cliche because it's never cliche in the what got you here, what will get you there, in everything. From being a mom or a dad or a coach or a professional. It's so true. Question everything because there's probably something else you should be doing as you move along in life. Speak to where they're listening. Meet them where they are. You also said that here. Those are, even beyond what you just said about founders, CEOs, those are two that are also just truisms across the board. So look, I really appreciate the help. Truly one of the best in the business that I've ever seen in coaching and leader development. And kudos to how good you are at your job, at what you do. And it was just a great conversation. What I really like, and I have the same feeling, I give Steve Schloss a shout out because you're both as good as it comes. I always learn something after I speak to you, and I did today. And I actually was a bit of a skeptic, and I become a true believer in kind of what you do. So I'm trying to spend more and more time, as you know, almost like evangelizing. Get a darn coach, get someone that you can kind of bring in from the outside. So thank you for this time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I will say a coach is only as good as the person they're coaching. And so I appreciate your kind words. It's because the team you're talking about, because you and your team have met me with openness, curiosity, a willingness to engage. And so it's a two-sided street. And so I thank you for being on this journey and being a fantastic partner to work with.
Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners Network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.